The messages came in at 2:14 inches the morning, 11 of them, back to back, from a number I did not recognize. I almost deleted them. I am 63 years old. I go to bed at 9:30, and the last thing I needed on a Tuesday night was whatever spam campaign had found its way to my flip phone. But something made me open the first one. Just one, I told myself. Then I would block the number and go back to sleep. The message read, "Grandpa, it is me, Eli. I need help. Please come." I read it 4 times before my hands started shaking. My grandson had not spoken to me in 4 years. He is 10 years old. He has nonverbal autism. He does not use a phone. He communicates through a device, a tablet with a special application that converts symbols and typed words into speech. His mother had told me, the last time we spoke, that he was doing wonderfully, that he barely remembered me, that my visits were confusing for him and disrupting his routine. She had asked me, very politely at first, and then not politely at all, to stop calling. I had believed her. I do not know why. She had always been good at making me feel like the problem, like my grief for my son was somehow an inconvenience to the family he had left behind. My son, Caleb, died 6 years ago, a work accident at a construction site in Denver. He was 34 years old. He had been the best thing I ever made, and when he was gone, the only piece of him I had left was Eli. And then she took Eli, too. I sat on the edge of my bed in my house in Tulsa, Oklahoma, reading all 11 messages in order. They had been sent in sequence over about 12 minutes, each one a few lines long, the kind of messages someone sends when they are typing carefully, choosing each word, the kind of messages that do not come from a spam campaign. "Grandpa, it is me, Eli. I have been trying to find your number for a long time. I found it in the old address book in the box in the garage, the one with Grandma's picture on the front. I remember you taught me to use the letterboard. I still practice. Derek took my communication device. He said, I don't need it at school anymore, but I still have the old tablet Mom forgot about. It still works if I use the letterboard app. I need to tell you something important. Derek has been taking money from Dad's account. I know because I saw the papers on his computer when he left the screen open. I wrote down the numbers. I can send them to you. Derek also hurts me. Not all the time, but sometimes when I do something he doesn't like, Mom doesn't know. Or maybe she knows and doesn't say anything. I don't know which one is worse. Please come, Grandpa. You are the only person who ever learned to talk to me my way. I knew if I found you, you would come. I did not sleep that night. His name is Eli James Morrow. He was named after my father. He has his father's eyes, dark brown and serious, the kind of eyes that seem to be calculating something important even when the rest of his face is still. When Caleb was alive, the 3 of us had a language. Not sign language, not quite, but a system of gestures and letterboards and the AAC device and a whole vocabulary of looks and nods that we had built together over years of patience and love. Eli could communicate more than most people gave him credit for. The problem was that most people did not bother to learn how to listen. My daughter-in-law, Maya, was not a bad person when Caleb was alive. She was overwhelmed and sometimes impatient and not particularly well suited to raising a child with complex needs, but she loved Caleb and she tried. After he died, she stopped trying. She met a man named Derek at a grief support group, which I have always found darkly appropriate, and within a year he had moved in, and within 2 years they were married, and within 3 years I was receiving polite emails explaining that my presence was causing Eli emotional distress and that it would be best for everyone if I gave the family some space. I gave them space. I sent birthday cards. I called on holidays and left voicemails that were never returned. I hired a lawyer once, but the lawyer told me that grandparent visitation rights in Oklahoma were complicated, and that without evidence of harm, a judge was unlikely to intervene in a step-parent household. I did not have evidence of harm. I had only a hollow feeling in my chest that grew worse every year, and a box of photographs of my grandson that I kept on the nightstand beside my bed. The morning after the messages arrived, I drove to the public library and used their computer, because mine is 12 years old and barely loads email. I found the name of an expert at the University of Tulsa, a woman named Dr. Patricia Osei, who specialized in augmentative and alternative communication and had written papers on language development in nonverbal children with autism. I printed out her contact information and called her office from the parking lot. She called me back the same afternoon. I explained the situation, feeling slightly ridiculous, aware of how it sounded. My estranged grandson had sent me 11 text messages in the middle of the night, using a forgotten tablet, messages that described fraud and abuse and were written with a precision I found impossible to explain. I asked if she would be willing to look at them. She was quiet for a moment, then she said she could see me Thursday. Her office was small and practical, bookshelves organized by color, a bowl of hard candy on the corner of her desk. She was in her early 50s, with reading glasses she kept taking off and putting back on, and an expression that I recognized immediately as someone who had seen too much and was still determined to be surprised by goodness. I handed her a printed copy of the messages. She read them once without speaking, then went back to the beginning and read them again more slowly. Then she set the papers down and looked at me. She asked how old my grandson was. 10, I said. She asked when he had been diagnosed. At 2, I said. Nonverbal from the beginning. He uses a letterboard and AAC when he has access to them. His father and I worked with him extensively before my son passed. I have not seen him in 4 years. She picked up the papers again and pointed at a passage. The one where Eli described seeing the financial documents on Derek's computer screen. She pointed specifically at the phrase he had used. I wrote down the numbers. I know they are account numbers because Dad used to let me watch when he paid bills and the numbers look the same. That is a conditional reasoning chain, she said. If-then logic applied across a time gap. He is connecting an observation from the present to a memory from years ago and using it to draw a conclusion. That is not something most 10-year-olds produce in natural writing. That is not something most adults produce without thinking about it carefully. I asked what she meant. She took off her glasses. She said that in her 21 years of working with nonverbal children, she had encountered perhaps a handful who demonstrated this level of written language sophistication at this age. She said that the messages showed not just vocabulary but syntactic awareness, emotional reasoning, and what she called metacognitive reflection, meaning that my grandson was not just describing events but thinking about what the events meant and what effect they might have on someone reading them. The line about not knowing which was worse, she said, whether his mother knew about the abuse or did not know. That line, that is an adult moral question. That is the kind of thing a child writes when they have been alone with their thoughts for a very long time. She said she wanted to talk to someone else before we continued. A colleague who worked in forensic evaluation of child communications. She said she hoped I did not mind. I said I did not mind. His name was Dr. Forrest Blaine, and he arrived 20 minutes later, still wearing his coat, like he had come from somewhere in a hurry. He was younger than Dr. Osei, maybe late 30s, with the focused energy of a person who does not allow themselves to be distracted. She handed him the printed messages without preamble. He read them standing up. When he finished, he sat down on the edge of her desk. He said, "This child is either one of the most linguistically advanced nonverbal autistic individuals I have ever encountered in the literature, or he has been warehoused for 4 years with nothing to do but read and think and practice language with no audience, which in its own way is a form of neglect significant enough to bring to the attention of someone with legal authority." He looked at me over the top of his glasses. He asked if there was a trust. I told him yes. My son had set up an educational and medical trust for Eli before he died. It was not a large sum, maybe $90,000, money Caleb had saved over years, money meant to pay for Eli's specialized schooling and therapy and communication devices. My son had named me as secondary trustee, with Maya as primary. I had not received an accounting statement in over 3 years. I had assumed this was intentional. Dr. Blaine and Dr. Osei exchanged a look. Doctor. Blaine said we needed to call someone. The Tulsa Police Department was professional and thorough and ultimately referred me to the Department of Human Services and the State Attorney General's office, which in turn contacted the FBI field office in Oklahoma City because a trust established under federal educational disability provisions falls under federal jurisdiction when there is suspected misappropriation. A special agent named Carolyn Watt called me 2 days later. She was brisk, efficient, and clearly very busy, but she listened to everything I said without interrupting. She asked me to forward the messages. I had already photographed them with my cell phone camera, the old-fashioned way, picture by picture. She said she would be in touch. I want to describe those next 8 days, but I am not sure language is adequate. I am a retired mechanic. I spent 40 years working on engines, which are logical systems with knowable causes for every failure. If something goes wrong, you trace it back, you find the part, you replace it, and it works. This was nothing like that. I had no control over anything. I could not call my grandson. I did not know if he still had the tablet, if Derek had found it, if my messages back to him had even arrived. I had written back, told him I was coming, told him I loved him, told him to stay safe and not let anyone know what he had sent me. I did not know if he had read it. I drove to the neighborhood where Maya and Derek lived. I did not go to the door. I just parked 2 streets over and sat in my truck for an hour, looking at the sky over the roof of a house I had never been inside, knowing my grandson was somewhere in there and being completely unable to do anything about it. On the 8th day, Agent Watt called. She said, "Mr. Morrow, I want you to know we have reviewed the trust account documentation." She paused. She said that over the past 3 years, approximately $74,000 had been withdrawn from Eli's educational trust through a series of transactions that were signed by Maya, but which show a pattern consistent with coercion or forgery. The money had been used for mortgage payments on a vacation property in Arkansas registered in Derek's name, 2 vehicle purchases, and what appeared to be business investment in a company that did not exist. She said that Eli's AAC device, the professional grade one that cost several $1,000s and had been purchased with trust funds specifically for his communication needs, had been sold on a second-hand marketplace website 11 months ago. She said the proceeds had gone into Derek's personal account. I sat in my kitchen and stared at the wall. They had sold my grandson's voice to pay for a lake house. She told me the warrants would be executed on Friday morning. She asked if I would be willing to be on standby at a location she would specify in case Eli needed a familiar face during the transition. She said the word transition in the careful way that social workers and federal agents use it. The way that means something significant has already been decided, and they are managing your expectations of how it will unfold. I said I would be there. I said I would drive through the night if I had to. She said that would not be necessary. She said to be at the parking lot of a church on Riverside Drive by 6 in the morning. I was there at 4:30. The sun came up pink and cold over Tulsa. I sat in my truck with a cup of coffee from a gas station and watched the sky change color and thought about my son. Caleb would have been 40 years old this spring. He had been the kind of person who remembered birthdays and fixed things around other people's houses without being asked. He had learned to communicate with Eli not because a therapist told him to, but because he could not stand the idea of his son having something to say and no one to say it to. I think about that sometimes, about what it means to decide that another person's way of communicating is worth learning. It is not a small thing. Most people would not do it. Most people find it easier to decide that the person who communicates differently is simply communicating less. At 6:47 inches the morning, I watched 3 police vehicles and 2 unmarked cars drive past me on Riverside Drive, heading toward the house. At 7:23, my phone rang. Agent Watt said, "Your grandson is safe. He is asking for you in the only way he can. He spelled out your name on a clipboard, one of our agents found in the kitchen. Can you come to the staging area?" I drove the 4 blocks in about 45 seconds. He was sitting on the back bumper of an ambulance with a blanket around his shoulders and a clipboard in his lap. He was small for 10, the way his father had been small at that age, with Caleb's same dark eyes and the particular stillness that some people mistake for absence, but which I have always understood as attention. He was paying attention to everything. He was paying attention to me the moment my truck came around the corner. He stood up before I had finished parking. I got out. I walked toward him. He ran. We met in the middle of the parking lot, and I dropped to my knees on the asphalt because I am 63 years old and I no longer care what I look like. He ran into me so hard I nearly fell backward. I held him. He held the clipboard flat against my back, fingers pressing it into my jacket, and I could feel him shaking in that particular way that is not cold and not fear but relief, the whole body releasing something it has been holding for too long. I pulled back to look at his face. His eyes were dry. He does not always cry when he is emotional. His father was the same way. He held up the clipboard. He had written, "I knew you would come. I knew you still wanted me." I took the clipboard. I wrote back, "Always. From the day you were born. Always." He read it. He nodded once, the way he has always nodded when something is confirmed rather than new information, when you have said out loud what he already knew in his bones. Then he sat back down on the ambulance bumper and let me put my arm around him. We sat there together while the work of consequences happened around us. Maya was taken from the house in handcuffs. I did not watch. A social worker told me she had not resisted, had seemed almost relieved in the strange way that people sometimes seem relieved when the thing they have been dreading finally arrives. I am not sure what to do with that. I spent a long time angry at her, and I will probably spend more time angry at her yet, but in that parking lot, sitting next to my grandson, with the morning coming up cold around us, I mostly felt something closer to sorrow. Derek was a different matter. He was not at the house when the warrants were executed. He had left the previous evening, which Agent Watt told me later might have meant he had suspected something or might simply have been coincidence. They found him at a motel off Highway 75 at 9 that morning. He did not go quietly. He went loudly, in fact, and added several additional charges to his situation in the process. What the investigation revealed over the following months was both more and less than I had expected. The trust fraud was exactly what the account records showed. $74,000 methodically moved, the documentation falsified in a way that was clumsy enough to unravel quickly once someone looked. Derek had done this before, it turned out, with a previous girlfriend in Kansas who had a child with medical needs. That case had not been prosecuted because the girlfriend had declined to cooperate. This time there was a federal investigation and a paper trail and, more importantly, there was Eli. About the abuse, I will say what the court records say and nothing more, because my grandson is a person, not a case study, and what was done to him belongs to him to describe or not describe as he chooses when he is older. I will say that it was real, and that it was documented, and that Dr. Osei testified as an expert witness that the way Eli had described it in his messages to me showed no signs of coaching or exaggeration. That the flat, matter-of-fact language was consistent with a child reporting something true that they have already processed enough to state clearly. She said that children who fabricate abuse tend to use dramatic language. Children who report real abuse tend to use the same tone my grandson used when he described what happened to him, the tone of someone who has accepted something and wants it acknowledged, not sensationalized. Derek received 11 years for the trust, fraud, and related charges, and an additional 7 for child endangerment and abuse, consecutive. Maya pleaded guilty to 1 count of fraud and received a suspended sentence contingent on supervised probation and restitution of the misappropriated funds. I was present when the plea was entered. She looked at Eli, and Eli looked at her, and I did not watch either of their faces, because that moment belonged to them alone. Eli came home with me in November of that year. I had spent the previous 2 months converting my second bedroom into a proper space for a 10-year-old, which mostly involved getting rid of 30 years of accumulated tools and storage, and painting the walls a shade of blue he had pointed to on a color card the social worker had shown him. He had a new AAC device, funded by a restitution order against Derek's estate. He had therapists and a specialized school, and, more importantly, he had me. The adjustment was not seamless. I want to be honest about that, because I think people who tell stories like this sometimes round off the difficult parts. The nights when he could not sleep and sat at the kitchen table at 3 in the morning, and I sat with him not knowing what to do except be there. The mornings when he refused to eat, and I had to learn quickly which textures he could tolerate and which ones he could not. The first time he had a sensory overload meltdown in a grocery store, and I had to sit down on the floor of the cereal aisle with him and wait it out while other shoppers stepped around us. I was not always the right person to help in the right way. I made mistakes. I moved too fast sometimes, expected too much, misread signals. But I also learned. That is a thing I want to be clear about. Learning is not a one-time event. It is not something you do and then you are finished. Communicating with my grandson has been a daily practice for years, and it will continue to be a daily practice for years more, and I would not trade a single morning of it for the quieter life I had before he came back to me. He started at his new school in January. It was a program in Tulsa that I had found through Dr. Osei's referrals, a small school that served children with complex communication needs, that treated AAC fluency as a genuine literacy skill, that did not spend its resources trying to make its students seem less visibly disabled. They had a communication specialist on staff named Miss Amara, who met with Eli twice a week and within 6 weeks had told me that he was one of the most sophisticated AAC users she had ever worked with at his age. I already knew that. I had known it since the letterboard, since the nights Caleb and I had spent teaching him that his way of communicating was worth teaching. But it meant something. Hearing it from someone with credentials. It meant that the years he had spent alone in that house, practicing language with no one to practice it with, had not broken him. It meant that he had preserved himself, had kept his intelligence and his voice intact through sheer stubbornness and belief that someone, somewhere, would eventually be on the other end of the message. He was right to believe that. About 7 months after he came to live with me, we were sitting on the back porch on a Sunday afternoon. I was reading. He was on his tablet, not the AAC device, but a regular tablet I had gotten him, watching nature documentaries about deep-sea creatures, which had become a particular obsession. He tapped my arm and held up the tablet. He had typed something in his notes application. It said, "Grandpa, how did you know to believe me? Some people who get messages like mine might think they were fake." I thought about that for a while. He watched me thinking. Patient the way he has always been patient. I typed back, "Because you used the word please. You could have written dozens of things to convince me, but you wrote, 'Please come.' That is what a child writes when they have been waiting a long time and they are not sure how much longer they can wait. That is not a word you use in a fake message." He read it. He set the tablet down on his knee and looked out at the backyard, which I had let go somewhat feral over the years and which he seemed to find more interesting than a tidy lawn. There was a bird feeder I had put up in October. He had strong opinions about which birds were worth watching. Then he picked up the tablet again. "I practiced that message for 3 weeks," he typed. "I wrote different versions. I was scared you would not believe me, or that I would say it wrong and you would call Mom to check and then Derek would find out. I almost did not send it." "What made you send it?" I remembered something Dad told me when I was little. I do not remember his exact voice because I never really heard it the way other people do, but I remember what he told me on the letterboard. He said, "When you need help, ask for it from someone who already learned your language. Those people chose you. They will not stop choosing you." I set down my own tablet and looked at my grandson for a long moment. He did not look back. He was watching the bird feeder, cataloging arrivals, which is something he does without seeming to do it, that peripheral attention that catches everything. My son had been gone for 6 years, but he had left things behind. Not just Eli, though Eli was the most important thing. He had left this, too. Instructions, planted years before they were needed. Seeds in the mind of a small boy who would carry them quietly through the hardest years of his childhood and use them, finally, on a Tuesday night at 2:14 inches the morning when there was no one else left to call. I thought about all the things I had lost. The years I had not been there. The birthdays I had missed. The first days of school I had not witnessed. The progress reports I had never received. I thought about the evenings my grandson had practiced language alone in his room, refining his sentences, sharpening his thoughts against the silent stone of that house, keeping himself ready for a conversation he did not know when he would get to have. I could not get those years back. Nothing was going to return them. But I was here now, and so was he, and the bird feeder needed to be refilled, and Miss Amara said he was exceptional, and his new school had a drama class that used AAC devices as theatrical instruments. And 2 weeks ago he had told me, using his device, that he wanted to learn to bake bread, which is something my wife had always done and which I had not attempted in 20 years, but which I was now prepared to attempt with significant enthusiasm and probably significant failure. We would figure it out. That is not a small thing, when you have spent 4 years not knowing if the person you love is all right. The right to sit next to someone on a Sunday afternoon and watch birds and figure things out together. I do not think I will ever take it for granted. At dinner that evening, he looked at me across the kitchen table and typed something on his device and let it speak the words aloud in the synthesized voice he has customized to be slightly lower than the default because, he once explained, it sounds more like what he thinks he would sound like if he used that kind of voice. The device said, "You are my favorite person. I wanted you to know that." I told him he was mine too. He nodded in that confirming way of his and went back to his soup. Outside, the November dark had come down early, and inside there were lights, and the old house that had been too quiet for too long had someone in it who needed it. And I needed him, and somewhere my son was in all of this if you looked at it right, his hands still at work, his foresight still operating in the world, connecting the two of us across everything that had tried to keep us apart. That is what love looks like in practice. Not the feeling, though the feeling matters. The practice. The daily decision to learn someone else's language. To make yourself available in the form they need. To leave behind instructions that outlast you, planted carefully enough that they survive. My son gave my grandson a belief that chose people will not stop choosing you. Eli carried that belief for 4 years in the dark, and it turned out to be true. I hope it is still true when you need it. I hope when the time comes, you have someone who already learned your language. And if you are that person for someone else, if there is someone in your life whose way of communicating you have taken the time to understand, do not stop. They are counting on you, even if they have not said so yet. They are practicing their message in the quiet, and when they finally send it, they are going to need you on the other end. Drop a comment and tell me who that person is for you. I read every single one. If this story reached you, hit like. It costs nothing and it means more than I can say. And if you want more stories like this one, real people, real choices, real consequences, subscribe to the channel and ring the notification bell so you never miss a new one. Share this with someone who needs to hear it tonight. Because sometimes the most important message you will ever receive arrives at 14 inches the morning from a number you do not recognize. And how you respond to it changes everything. Thank you for being here.